Dear guests, thank you for coming at this early hour, and we promise that we will have an interesting discussion on the topic of identity and literature today. I am the founder and director of Ari Literature Foundation, a non-profit organization based in Yerevan, Armenia, which aims to build multicultural dialogues to enhance the role of literature in the regional context and to make Armenia an active partner in shaping literary platforms and cooperation. We're happy to be a partner in organizing this panel discussion here at Frankfurt Book Fair in cooperation with Konrad Adenauer Foundation South Caucasus and with the support of the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture, Sport of the Republic of Armenia. What do we understand when we talk about identity? Is it about our nationality, the way we are brought up by our families, or just how we individually identify ourselves in today's world of globalism and multiculturalism? Is there such an idea as national literature? Or can we all feel and then write about in our books things that can be understood by readers worldwide? These are some of the topics that will be touched upon on this panel today. Last year at Frankfurt Book Fair, we all were talking about the war against Ukraine. But this year, not only that war is not over, but we additionally have other stories of violence to talk about. This summer, while we were developing the idea of this event, 120,000 Armenians living in Artsakh, known to you as Nagorno-Karabakh, were in blockade for more than 10 months by Azerbaijani government. Less than a month ago, when we were already planning this event, this panel discussion, the Armenians of Artsakh were displaced from their homeland, leaving behind their homes, memory of their families living on that land for several centuries, and fresh graves of their sons, husbands, and fathers. For the past week, the main news topics are encounters between Palestine and Israel. While governments fight for land and power, they disregard the people who just want to live peacefully and happily in their lands, countries, and homes. Throughout history of many nations, they have been urged to leave their homelands and find themselves in other countries where they had to suffer to preserve their identity, redefine it, or to be able to survive. Years will pass, and these wars, conflicts, tragic events will become books to tell our stories to the next generations. We're here to talk about literature and books and how they reflect our identity, what impact they have or maybe don't have on our lives. Let me introduce the speakers of this panel. Armen is a fiction writer and essayist. He is the president of Pan-Armenia Center since 2017. He is known for his short story collection, The Return of Kikos, published in 2013, and 2 books from his trilogy Motherland, which were published in 2017 and 20. Anahit Ghazaryan is a writer, visual artist, and researcher from Yerevan, Armenia. In the last several years, Anahit has worked with text, audio, visual materials, including photography, and most recently with documentary theater, play, and film. She has authored 2 books, and her first documentary film will be released next year. Laura Cwiertnia is a journalist and fiction writer from Germany. She is editor at Die Zeit. Her first novel was published in 2022 and is called Outside We Have Another Name. Laura's father is Armenian and mother is German, and in her novel, she discusses her Armenian and German identities. And Susanna Yeghoyan, a senior lecturer at the University of Graz in Austria, a translator of German language. Susanna left Armenia to continue her studies, but Austria became her new home. She is recently doing literary translations from Armenian into German and promotes Armenian literature in German-speaking countries. And the panel will be moderated by Stefan Malerius, the director of Konrad Adenauer Foundation South Caucasus. Stefan has a degree in Slavonic languages and literature. Thank you, and I hope the panel will be interesting for you. I'm sorry, I have to introduce Zara Hakopian from the National Library of Armenia, who will read for you a short address from the Ministry of Culture of the Republic of Armenia. Thank you.
Dear guests, on behalf of the Ministry of Education, Science, Culture and Sports of the Republic of Armenia, I am very happy to greet you all in this beautiful hall. We are proud to be present at the International Frankfurt Book Fair, having our national Armenian stand, and are happy to have contributed to today's panel discussion. Armenia has been present at the Frankfurt Book Fair for over 20 years, and I do hope that this tradition will be continuous. We do acknowledge the importance of organizing such dialogues in the frames of the big events in the publishing industry to make our voices be heard on a bigger scale and be available to larger international audience. I believe that this discussion will be of interest to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation to you for coming here and for your interest. We are a political foundation, but politics and literature are very often very closely interrelated and referring to each other. And though we want to talk about literature and identity today, we cannot, of course, ignore what Arevik already mentioned, what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh less than a month ago. And what this means, the forced expulsion of more than 100,000 Armenians from their homeland, what this means for Armenian society, Armenian identity, and yes, probably also literature. But first of all, we want to show with this panel discussion that it is not only Armenia that matters, but also the literature. And that the literature is a literature that is really worth being known and being read. That brings me to my first question to Armen. Could you give us a brief overview over Armenian literature in the 20th, 21st century and reflect on its Armenianness or Europeanness? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to keep it short, but if I'm running out, because I'm very talkative. So if I'm running out of my time, just stop me there. Okay. So first of all, identity literature. Yeah, these two big topics we have today to discuss. What we should know, it's obvious, both an identity and literature are nowadays in very big crisis. Let's fix it, because identity in Armenia is we are, as Armenians, also having Arevik presented the background and context in kind of an identity crisis and trying to overcome the hardships of geopolitical situation that Armenia is now going through very hard times, let's say. And the crisis with literature, it's a global crisis in a way because of the wars all around. And we know somehow that no writing doesn't even matter how creative, how genius, how well done is it, can't stop a simple bullet. So this is the reality of nowadays that every author is facing. And many of us are now really depressed and thinking, what are we doing? Should we keep doing this writing thing? How are we going to change the world? Doing this, unnecessary in a way job of writing and publishing and selling out, etc., etc. So there is this big question of our literary identity as well, and these two big crises are the ones that we are now trying to overcome in Armenia. In Armenia, this identity crisis is kind of really very strong one, because for 2 decades there was this national dogma, let's say. Or Russia or Turkey, because the geopolitics of the region is quite, these are 3 southeastern countries, small ones, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan, surrounded with big ex-empires or empires. That's Turkey, Iran, and Russia. And Armenia's path was connected with Russia for like not only Armenians, but Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan was part of the Soviet Union. And after the collapse of Soviet Union, Armenia stayed in strategic partnership with Russia, hoping that it will give it some kind of, security umbrella and economics and all the stuff. But the sad reality of nowadays is that Russia is becoming more and more totalitarian. It's obviously totalitarian, actually. And Armenia is trying to go forward with democracy because we have nothing else, actually. We don't have oil, we don't have gas, we don't have even many people. There is this demographic crisis, etc. So we are in a situation, let's call it like a Bride of Frankenstein or something like that. And now we're trying hard to go out. And the thing is that decolonization and democratization used to be seen as separate tracks in development. Like, okay, we will go towards democracy, and decolonization is something else. Now these two tracks are, united in a way, and you can't, yes, overlapping in a way. So you can't go. So the one question that is standing there is how to get rid of Russia. If I put it like really, really very simply, of course, I'm simplifying the things, but it's the reality. And the influences also, because Armenian literature in Soviet era obviously was very, very much influenced by Russia literature, how powerful, all these big names, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, etc., not only classical Russian literature. So the influence in Armenia was so huge that it took a lot of time to, Armenian authors to just free the language from Russian influence. And all the 90s, we were just doing, somehow a linguistic experimental project of getting rid of this Russianism in a way from our literature. And there were not many stories told in that time because it was more about, freeing or emancipating the language from this influence. And now we started a next generation of authors. There are, they got rid somehow of the Soviet heritage, let's say, and now we are more vocal. We started to tell our stories, which can be interesting also to an international audience in a way. And institutions are working. Arabic, for example, she's many years also in the field as a literary agent. She's my literary agent, by the way, also. So, but the thing is that Armenia is very small, very homogeneous, and the culture itself is so self-centered in a way. In Armenian book market, you can't find a book telling about, a nice story about a Chinese person, for example, traveling in Armenia also. So it's all about Armenia, Armenianists, Armenian issues. So very, very, very self-centered in a way. Am I running out of the time? Yeah. Okay, one minute. That this is itself is a question. So the language, for small language, old language Indo-European, having its own alphabet, a lot of historical background, cultural background, old Christian, all is there, but still very concentrated on its own pain, self-victimizing itself a lot. So, and doesn't have really a huge empathy towards others. So in Armenian literature, you can't find books or stories told about others also. It's all about us. In a way, and sometimes you're getting bored, reading these books. Okay, these guys have some problems, some terrible things happen to them, but why am I reading this? So this is a question that European reader or Western reader or any common reader could ask himself. So here we should have our argument and say, why are these stories interesting? Why are these stories crucial? Why should you read this? And I hope that we will get some kind of answer to this question also during our panel discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Armin. I take this as very good setting the stage. So starting with politics, then moving to literature, and let us come with a focus closer to what we said in the agenda. So literature and identity. Anahit, asking you as a poet, how language can represent identity, and can language be a homeland?
Thank you. First of all, when we think about the language, we should take into consideration that language is the first thing that we can think about ourselves and about the world in the language. So language is the tool that we use. And for Armenians, it's a very, very crucial tool because we didn't have statehood for centuries, and language and religion, of course, was functioning as physical land, I would say. It was like a homeland for Armenians. It was like a place to exist, the language. And the very fact that we have two official languages, like we have Eastern Armenian and we have Western Armenian, it perfectly presents the history that we've gone through. So people who lived in Anatolia, nowadays Turkey, we call it Western Armenia, they speak some language, like a variation of the language. And we Armenians, from Armenia, we speak Eastern Armenian, which was developed in the connection with like local Armenian. So we have these two terms. We have local Armenian and we have the term diaspora Armenian. And saying local Armenian means nothing if we don't have diaspora Armenians. And this interaction between these two different and the same like group of people who need to communicate in a way. But these two groups of people, Armenians, has different has the same goal. They love Armenian, they love the language. But for instance, diaspora Armenia is like it's a diverse, we have, I don't know, there are so many geographies that you can add. You can say Iranian Armenian, Russian Armenian, Turkish Armenian, American Armenian. So it's like endless. So all the geography you can. And when you imply this geography, it means that you bring also the language. So there are so many like linguistic diversity in Armenian itself. So in Lebanese, Lebanese Armenians speak a lot using like Arabic words, which totally makes sense because they were interacting with the host country. So these all diversities tells one thing, the very fact that we cannot describe Armenianness or Armenia in a one way, it also can be a great description. So something that is not being, so the very fact that we cannot describe, Armenian is this, it's so diverse, and this diversity becomes its own way of describing. And literature, like if you come to literature, of course, Western Armenian and Eastern Armenian, what we try to do, we try to bring together and mass together these two different languages in a way. And now there's a lot of like diaspora Armenians moving to Armenia and speaking and mixing the languages. So it's not like a completely two different languages. It's just two variation. And for instance, Western Armenian, they just have this sort of policy. They translate all the words instead of just borrowing some words. In Eastern Armenian, since we had like a homeland, like we have like a ground that we can stand on, we are just like more free to just borrow words and not feel endangered by doing that. So languages are very interesting. And even if you meet an Armenian and the way they speak, you can understand, you are Iranian Armenian. And this is like fascinating. The fact that how language can bring geography also in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Anahit, for adding to the picture. I mean, you said the country is homogeneous, the Armenian as we know it right now, but there's the diaspora, and it's adding a lot of diversity.
Layers, so many layers.
Yeah.
And history, of course. Yeah. How did these people ended up being in these different countries? And this is also, so when we talk about identity, we need to, take into consideration that identity is in a way, it's a fiction and social and historical construction. But if we dive deep and understand how are these identities shaped throughout the history, this is interesting. Not just saying what is the identity, just saying like, how did it happen that we ended up having this kind of identity?
Yeah, right. It's interesting because it's giving an idea of the richness of the topic that we are talking about. Let me widen the perspective a little bit, Susanna, asking you as a translator, knowing Armenian literature and knowing the German perception, what do Germans know about Armenia and Armenian literature in particular?
Yeah, okay. Thank you for this question. Considering the place where we're having this discussion, I think it's really important to ask ourselves what German readers know about Armenia and Armenian literature. And from my experience, unfortunately, not that much. But I hope this will change in future. And maybe I will try to answer your question by giving an overview. What Armenian books or Armenian literature exists in German translation, and what literature exists about Armenia in German by dividing it into groups. And first group, I would call the authors or writers of German or Austrian origin, or German or Austrian writers of non-Armenian origin who wrote about Armenia because they were interested in the country, in its history, in its culture. And I think the most famous representative would be Franz Werfel and his 40 Days of Musadak, which is a historical novel about heroic resistance of a small group of people during Armenian genocide of 1915. Then we have present day German writers of Armenian heritage, Armenian origin, and one representative is here, sitting here with us, who write in German about their Armenian identity from their very own perspective. And they do it in German. And further, I would outline a group, and now I'm proceeding to translations, of writers within the Armenian diaspora who write in the languages of their countries where they live. And we heard about the diversity of Armenian diaspora. So they write about their identity, and it's a central topic as well, in different languages, like in English or in Russian, in Turkish, and in Romanian. And these books are also translated into German. To give an example, the Armenian-Romanian author Varujan Boscanyan and his Book of Whispers that has been translated into more than 20 languages. And then I would like also to mention a group of Armenian authors during the Soviet period. And their books mostly have been translated into German with the use or yes, because there were already existed Russian translations. So there were translations not directly from Armenian into German, but from Russian into German, or by means of interlinear translation. And now, last but not least, a small but constantly growing group, translations that are being done directly from Armenian into German of present days authors. And these writers, two of them are sitting here, and also Susanna Yeghoyan and Brig and other authors. They write about topics, about themes, about something what is happening today. And on the one hand, so they are being translated now into German. And on the other hand, we also have rediscovered Armenian classical writers. And they are being rediscovered also by Armenian publishers and also by foreign publishers. So this is the broad picture. If you want to have a picture about what German readers know about Armenian literature.
Thank you very much, Susanna. It's a second picture. So we have the Armenian pictures now. We have the picture of Armenian literature in European or German perception. You have already been referring to Laura as an example, and we are very happy to have you here. Not only being a manifestation of one of the pillars, but also being able to contribute to the discussion about literature and identity, because your book, Auf der Straße heißen wir anders, is very much about identity torn between an Armenian father and a German mother. Tell us about your search for identity. What does identity mean for you?
Is it on? Yeah. I think it's very interesting that you say that the book is about the identity between the German mother and the Armenian father, because many people asked me after I wrote this book, why didn't you write so much about the mother? It was like always elderly women who were like, why did you leave out the mother so much? Because of course it is playing it's a huge part that the protagonist is growing up in Germany and that she has a German mother and German roots. But I think the most important thing is for her to grow up with an Armenian father who is coming from Turkey, who has its roots in Istanbul. Because this is so interesting what you said. If you ask me now what my search for identity is, or what the search for identity of my protagonist is, I could never say that it is that they found or that I found the Armenian identity in this search, because it's a complete unique experience I made, because I had to search for an identity that wasn't given to me. And especially, it's not that unique because I met many Armenians from Germany who had the same experience. But my father grew up in Turkey and later in the Turkish community in Germany, where a lot of discrimination is still a living experience. He was fearing to give me his Armenian identity, and then he didn't want me to be named Armenian. He didn't want me to speak Armenian. They always cooked Armenian food, but it's very, very similar to Turkish food. In my family also, they speak Turkish because the language was taken from them. So, and my father speaks Western Armenian because he learned it, but it's not his mother language because it was taken from him. So I always, when I grew up, I thought, can I call myself Armenian? Now meeting you, like, am I Armenian? I'm sorry, am I Armenian? But after writing this book and while writing this book, and then I did a lot of public readings and met a lot of other Armenian people from Germany, I now came to the conclusion that my Armenian identity is this loss of identity, this lack of identity, this need to search for my own identity is my Armenian identity because it was taken from us.
Oh, thank you very much. It's another layer actually in our discussion, I think. We thought of having a second round of questions, and then we open up towards the end of our hour to your question and answers.
Stefan, may I just quickly say something about what you said?
Yeah, sure.
When I was thinking about identity, I was like, what should I say? And I was thinking that how much identity is connected on what you are not. Instead of describing yourself as a person who have the certain values and beliefs, you rather say that who you are not and how you can build your identity against something. And this is so interesting to me, like excluding, I'm not this. And the very thing that you will be discriminated for and the difference that people can put in between you and them, and then that will make you and them. And the very thing can describe you, even though you are not you don't decide to have that part as part of your identity, but the way people and others and surrounding, it could be a person, it could be a nation, the very thing that you will be discriminated and you can be pressured for, even though you don't choose that it can be your identity, it becomes your identity, and how much it's external rather than internal, and how much you are not building inside out, you are doing the other way. You are building your identity outside in, and that's very, very interesting. Negative.
Maybe I can add a little thing because you also asked me about the German identity. In Germany, we have this huge problem that the people tend to they want to say, okay, this person is German and this person is not German, and maybe this is half German and quarter German, and I don't know. And because we are in immigration country, but we still, after so many years, don't relate to that so much. So if you ask me for my identity, I would say I'm full German, complete German. But my father also is full German, although he wasn't born here, complete German. But he has this Armenian part. I have this Armenian part. But this is a huge problem in Germany right now, that we have this problem, all these identities, and can they be German? And I would say yes.
Thank you for this intervention. And let us stay with this identity question, but move back to Armenia. So Armenian identity, I've read somewhere, is built around national heroes, events in history, around cultural literature, of course, but also around geography. And let us now add, because we all followed what happened last month with Nagorno-Karabakh and the expulsion of the ethnic cleansing that took place, and that was all over the world in the media. So Nagorno-Karabakh is one of the geographic elements of identity in Armenia. I mean, now having lost for the time being Nagorno-Karabakh, what type of impact might this have on Armenian identity? That is one thing, and the second, will there be literature reflecting on this? Like we know from Ukraine, the Ukrainian war is covered by Ukrainian literature a lot. How will that be in the Armenian case?
Okay. As I've already mentioned, so there is this huge crisis. So Armenia or Armenianness should be somehow retaught. We should rethink ourselves. Otherwise, we are like stuck. We don't have other options. So for a long while, it was clear, like Russians are good guys and Turkey is bad guys. They genocide us, they killed us, etc. So Russia is good guys. Now it's obvious Russia is not good guys. They are even worse. So these are bad guys. So we are surrounded with a lot of bad guys, and we still think that we are the good guys, but we are like victims, good guys and victims at the same time. So we should come out of this self-victimization and try to be more, just rethink our identity. Rethink our identity. So what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh is just, a proof of that thing, that we were not flexible enough to rethink ourselves. If we had been enough, like political elites, if Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia, etc., to rethink ourselves and not go to war like, okay, let's go and die, all of us, blah, 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 but to rethink ourselves and do something else, something out of box, then probably there would be a solution even in such a tense geography as Armenia is taken, to start talking to our neighbors like Turkey. It's a hard conversation, but we should be ready to these hard conversations and be more productive, more flexible. So that's one thing that Armenian identity is lacking. Despite the fact that it's diverse, the huge diaspora, it's, 3 times more or 4 times more people living out of the country than in the country. Huge diaspora, diverse diaspora, with a huge problem also, passing the generational trauma from generation to generation. And we have 4th or 5th generation already taking this trauma and passing to the others. And somehow this trauma was institutionalized and put also, like copy-pasted to Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh as well, because we have no other narratives. The mega narrative is only one: genocide. There is no alternative. If you are Armenian, you are a survivor of genocide, etc., etc. So you have all these dogmatic narratives around, and you are just stuck. You can't think of yourself in other terms. You are just there is only this, okay, self-victimization, ethnic cleansing, please, we have one. Genocide, please, we have one. But we don't have any other options. So there is no room for other identities in a way, despite the fact that we are so diverse. Then the one which is like very dogmatic, it should be and leads us to isolation. So small, isolated country. And literature, of course. Can literature be a tool to reshape, to rethink Armenian identity? I believe so, but for that we need more progressive authors. We need to push them out. We need to make them more vocal, because these guys are, in a way marginalized. And the traditionists are still very powerful in Armenian literature, and it's a bit because it's profitable. You write a good book about genocide, you have all the chances to be translated, get an international attention, etc., etc. You write a good book about gay Armenians, nobody cares. Like gay Armenian literature, what's that? Can it be like interesting? Really? No. So we should rethink ourselves. And here I see a huge potential of literature also, because literature somehow shaped our national identity. In a way, it played a huge role. We didn't have, like, in classical sense of philosophers or, like, thinkers, big names, etc. So all elite of the country was like these writers, authors, etc., who became also the leaders of the nation in a way. So it's very language based, as Anahit mentioned, identity. So a core of our identity is still Armenian as a language, having this old alphabet, etc., etc., etc. So, and that's why even in 21st century, it may sound like a little bit strange, but the public discourse is largely shaped by literary discourse in Armenia. That's why literature in Armenia can play a huge role, and also in overcoming this crisis, also literature can be one of the keys. If we'll be like courageous enough to rethink ourselves, to reposition ourselves, to be out of box of this, and to overcome the Turkophobia and see our neighbors are our potential partners going on forward. So this is one. Armenia has only one issue in reality: to overcome Turkophobia and to start behave. To rethink itself and start, spreading new alternative narratives. Otherwise, we will be just isolated as we used to be. We will get rid of Russia. Of course, Russia will eventually go, but then we will stay totally alone, isolated in our mountains. And then no Turkey, no Azerbaijan, no others should do anything. They can they can just stop and wait. We will do the finishing everything ourselves.
Yeah. Well, we come to your question and comments.
There is other scenario I'm like talking about this, Anahit. We should rethink ourselves.
Yeah. I mean,
should we have a
just a moment?
with the audience?
Let us stay with the panel, because I wanted to ask Anahit, because when thinking of the conflict on Nagorno-Karabakh and escalation, wanted to ask you about your latest book, and the latest book is about covering a dialogue between two young Armenians about the war in 2020. Please.
This is really very interesting, the idea of rethinking ourselves. But I, as a writer, I was asking myself, should literature always run after the reality? There should be some catastrophes, some wars, some tragedies. And my role as a writer is just to document that. And I was like, instead of mirroring the reality, can literature form and shape some sort of reality where we won't have wars and tragedies anymore? Instead of writing good books about genocide, can literature create some kind of space where we can exclude even the idea of war or not? This is maybe very romantic perception of literature, but at the same time, I believe that still writing and literature has some sort of power over reality. It does, like, in a way. And while I was just running after the reality and just trying to document the war, so writing about the war, this is another like identity crisis. But writing as a writer, to exist during the wartime, when your people are going through this tragedy, like who the hell you are to write about? How is that possible to write about the war? How you can write the war? The very fact that you are alive and you feel and you exist, it's kind of like makes you feel horrible about yourself, that people are dying there and you are just like documenting their pain. But at the same time, you are like, this is the only tool. This is the only thing that I can do to deal with the reality. And my book, which is like also raising these questions about living in a modern society and witnessing war, having war on our screens all the time. So there's war, and then what is the difference between 20th century wars and the wars happening in 21st century? Just we have live access on war. It's like in our pocket. You just take it out, and the war, where? In Armenia, in Artsakh, in Palestine, in Ukraine, war is in your pocket all the time. And how you can write about that, and is it possible to write about that, and what can you say, what can you offer, rather just like mirroring the reality or writing your interaction with the reality. So my book is in a way unfiltered. What we try to do, it's like a mixed genre of diary entries and internet messaging, and I'm trying to bring internet messaging into literature, because for me, online world and the conversation that we hold on online platforms are very important, and it's part of literature, and I want it to end up being in the literature, because it shapes our thought. We are all the time, from morning till the night, we are just texting each other, and how can this text be part of literature? Because we want to have connection with the reality also in a way how it is formed. It's not just like you sit in your room and you write about these philosophical things. How can world, like how is like you're always accessible to your friend who lives in the other side of the world. So what I try to do, it's like I was during the war in 2020, in Artsakh 2020 war, I was living in London, and my friend was in the war zone working with the international journalists, and we were exchanging messages. And it's just rising questions. How is that possible to have war going online, and like what we talk? Wasn't part of main discourse in terms of we weren't sharing posts on social media. We were just talking what we feel, what we witnessed, what we ate. And this is also interesting because it's kind of sort of it doesn't become part of the literature, because you supposed to write about what? About victory, about identity, but also there's something going on there inside people. And that's also important. And what we try to do, we are just trying to document and present what a lot of people went through when they weren't on the front line. So you also experience war even if you are not on the front line. And how is that possible? Because it mentally makes you sick. Yeah.
Thank you, Anahit. Very impressive. But let me, for a moment, again try to widen this scope and ask Susanna again towards the background that Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan gave a speech to the European Parliament last week, stressing that Armenia is interested in getting politically as close as possible to Europe. Now, when thinking of the literature, Armenian literature, how does this literature fit into the European context?
Yeah, it does fit. And if you hear all these ideas and all this diversity, then I strongly believe that we have to give all these authors, writers, ideas a voice in German. That because this is the only way for German readers to see, to experience how European these perspectives are. And maybe the Armenian context differs from German context, or from Spanish, or from Swedish, or from other European contexts. But the way how this present day generation of writers presents their ideas, the language they use, and the whole discourse in general cannot be alien to German readers. And it can also enrich the German literature and give it a new facet. So that is what I strongly believe as translator and as person who has been living for a very long time in Austria and in Europe.
Thank you, Susanna. And Laura, one question to you, still towards the background of what we just discussed with literature reflecting crisis situation, war, atrocities, and so on. What in general, and from a little bit outside perspective, from a German perspective, as a journalist, also what should be the role of literature in such extreme situation that we have been witnessing in Armenia, but elsewhere as well.
I found it very interesting what you were saying, that you now sit there and ask yourself, does it mean anything to write? Do we still have to go on writing? And I remember Maxim Biller, a German author, saying this after the war in Ukraine started. He was saying, writing something, I can't quote it correctly, but he was saying something like, why should I go on writing, or I don't want to go on writing as now war again in Europe is happening. And I have the feeling that this is a very true feeling, but still I'm totally convinced that, and being a journalist, I'm totally convinced that literature has a huge power in this time, maybe not to change the world, but to give the people some way to cope with what is happening. And I think this is very important, like the work you did, I regard it as very, very important. And I did not write about a book about Nagorno-Karabakh, but my book is about the trauma coming from the genocide, or another genocide book, I'm sorry, but in Germany we are not over that point yet. I said this funnily, but actually in Germany we're not over that point yet, because this trauma, as you said, is giving all the time again and again and again to the next generation. And from my point of view, this is happening because there was not such kind of literature talking about the genocide and focusing on the genocide, especially in the Turkish community and in the German diaspora community. And in the last 4 years or 3 years, there have come out like 4 books, I know, about that topic. And I think this is super important. And just to say one more thing, I had a public reading 3 or 2 weeks ago in Cologne. And there were coming a lot of Armenians from the Turkish Armenian community in Germany, and I was reading my book, and there were people crying in the audience. I think especially because what is happening right now in Nagorno-Karabakh, and this is making trauma visible again. And this was a feeling when I was reading there, I was thinking, oh, okay, I cannot change anything, but I can give these people some feeling to get their sadness out. And this was for one of the few times feeling a little bit powerful in the last weeks.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Also very interesting and impressive. We do have 10 minutes left, and I would like to open the discussion to you. So if there are any questions or comments, then please raise your hand and briefly introduce yourself. I see 1-2 hands over there. So, and we will collect the questions and then get back to Ben.
It's just a light comment. Maybe it will come up with the question. I don't think that we have to kind of close the genocide theme on our literature, because it's not only wrong, it's stupid. It's like asking Jews to not make movies and books about Holocaust, or saying that if Steven Spielberg made a movie Schindler's List, it's enough, let's not movie. Every nation has its own narrative that is built on. Jews have Holocaust, or I don't know, Europe has World War I, World War II. It's not that German writers don't write about Berlin War or living split and then reunited again. It's the question of how to produce, yes, not victimize, but also stories of genocide that have somehow national pride on it, and also to export those novels on these art of work to the world and be also successful. Because the main problem of Armenian literature, that the only book about genocide that has got Nobel Prize was a Turkish writer. So the question of Armenian literature identity is not to overcome Orhan Pamuk, by the way. So it's not that we have to give up genocide as a theme on our literature, is that we have to create works that are competitive on world market. And second, do you know Syria as a country right now? I believe it's a no man's land because we have Turkish controlled country, we have Kurds that has some kind of autonomy, and has Assad. But de facto and de jure, it's a no man's land, and no one has any idea what's happening in Syria. Unfortunately, that is the scenario that Turkey and Azerbaijan wants for Armenia, to be a land of no one. Mm-hmm. They want Russians to be gone with the help of the EU, but the Armenia with zero sovereignty and a transport corridor. So for me, I don't believe the peace agenda, because if you want a competitive and collegial neighborhood, you have to be strong.
Okay.
Thank you. My question is to the panelists is, and also about the war in
but could you formulate the question?
Yes. The formulated question is, do you think that the theme of genocide and also the war in Artsakh and also last 3 years should be the main topic of Armenian literature?
Okay, thank you. There was a second question, I think, behind. Who else wanted to put a question here? So yeah, over there.
That was me. But do you want to get an answer and then I will ask a question, so we don't like?
No. We could we do have 5 minutes left,
okay.
So we collect all questions.
Well, all right.
But very brief, if possible, because we need to get back to the panel.
My question is related to Armen of Armenia, because there was some part you said that I was quite confused. So just correct me if I'm wrong. So there's this war in Artsakh, so there is this genocide and there is this tragedy that happened to us. Do you say that you want to avoid it all and write about something else which is not related to that? And if it is so how come you talk about identity? Because if this is not related to your identity, then you as a writer, so what do you want to write about? Write about what, flowers in Africa?
Okay, the question is clear. We do have a third one, I think, here in the front. And then we go back to the panel.
Thank you. It's for me, it's a little strange to hear this ask how European is Armenian literature, because it's like you can ask also how European is Greece literature or Portuguese or Spanish, because it's from Middle Age is European. This is part European culture, literature also, when you can't separate it. Because it's, for me, it's always strange to hear. This is absolutely not Asia. The way you take things or way just look at. It's absolutely just European.
Okay. Thank you. One last question, and then we go back to the. Yeah. Okay.
It's about literature. What are the books the people in Armenia are reading? What are the bestsellers there?
Okay. Good. Thank you very much. The narratives, the Armenian narratives, Armenian literature.
Okay, what I want to say, nobody can decide what should be topics of Armenian literature, because it's up to Armenian writers. It's an individual decision, what you are interested, etc. So it's not Soviet times of Gorky deciding the topics, for now we write about kolkhoz, or now we write about genocide, or now it's time for Artsakh, etc. There is no such policy, and it shouldn't be. One thing that Armenia... It's on? One thing that Armenia really enjoyed exercising in democracy is freedom of speech and freedom of, thinking in a way. So there is no, in nowadays Armenia, there is no state censorship. So you can write anything you want. It's just, depends if it's it will be marketized, commercialized, or it will be marginalized, etc. But there is no such topic, like official topics of what are we going to write, etc. And genocide, of course, as far as the trauma is not, overcame somehow. It will be like topic for many authors searching for their identity, going into memory policies, family memory, etc., etc. So no one can say, okay, we stop now writing about genocide, but let's try to stop about, I don't know, something else. So there is this misunderstanding. The conversation was not at all about writing this or right or censorship or, having this market somehow oriented here or there. The conversation was about simple existential threat question. Are we ready as nation to rethink ourselves, or we are going to continue the old narratives which are not working anymore? And it's quite obvious they are not working in Europe as well. The crisis is everywhere. And if not Ukraine standing against the war, this probably would continue going on. So Ukraine did a huge thing. They just changed the whole narratives in Europe. They just made Europe, including people in Germany, to rethink their own attitudes, to start thinking at least, because there it was about inertia there. Yeah, we know this, we know that, we know this about Russia, etc. So we should go out to this inertia and be more creative, be more out of box. That's all I was trying to say in this to this audience during this panel discussion. And of course, it's a misunderstanding. I would never dare to say, write this or write that. Who am I? I'm not Gorky. These times are gone. Nobody can say such thing.
Thank you. I mean, Laura, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I wanted to add something. Maybe that's, how do you say in English? Compromise.
Compromise.
It's compromise? Okay. Because when I was writing this book, this book is about the genocide. It is about the roots of genocide. And when I was writing it, I had the urge to do that. But on the same hand, I was like, I don't want to write about genocide. Why is all this I find about Armenian identity always about genocide? What's the other Armenian thing? For example, in my book, it's not only the genocide that is causing problems for Armenian people. For example, my book is also about the guest worker migration to Germany about the women who came from Turkey to live in Germany, Armenian women, their identity. But this is also a very negative thing. But I had both things. I feel the urge to write about the genocide, but not only about that. And maybe this is not a question about whether one thing or the other thing. I think we need both.
Thank you, Laura. Susanna, briefly on two open questions. There's Europeanness of Armenian literature.
Words. As we see, literature is about emotion. It's about feelings, and we cannot be dogmatic about emotions. And I think translation, as from the translator's point of view, translations can help also to support in Armenia to develop these different perspectives and these different perceptions. So because people are talking about what has been translated into English, into German, what has been perceived in these countries, and this can support, and I think from my point of view, feelings and emotions should be given a voice in Armenian and also in German.
Thank you. We are over time already 1 minute, but Anahit will have the concluding remark now, and then the question about what are the upcoming projects and books. We bilaterally discuss this. Anahit, the final remark.
I know how crazy it could sound for Armenians, like what Armen said, but do we have the courage to have other narrative for ourselves rather than trauma? Can we create? Are we able? Can we find this intellectual wideness and recreate, just like self-made? Can we do that rather than focusing on what others did to us? Can we have our own agenda? That's the question. To take the courage to shape ourselves and have our own agenda about ourselves rather than focusing on what we have experienced. And we are, in a way, we are doomed in a cycle that we are just going over and over. And about the question of, I'm not I'm not the right person to answer. Maybe you can. What are the
No,
bestsellers?
we are over time, so I invite you all. There is our Armenian stand there. We will spend some time. And
Off stage. Yeah.
something
Thank
is
you.
going on there. Yeah?
Thank
we
you
can
very much.
continue the conversation in
It was a very,
non-formal.
very relevant and a very interesting discussion. So literature shapes the identity. We have to rethink ourselves. Literature has huge power to change things and to give people tools to cope with what is happening. So thank you very much for your interest. And we invite to the Armenian stand, I guess. Thank you very much.